Welcome to the Standard Deviations podcast, presented by Orion Advisor Solutions and hosted by Dr. Daniel Crosby, Orion's Chief Behavioral Officer and New York Times best-selling author. Today's investors expect more than a transaction. They want a relationship. Show how your firm merges EQ and IQ with Orion's VFI 20, a new shareable assessment developed by Dr. Daniel Crosby that provides you with emotional and attitudinal insights into clients to facilitate more meaningful investing conversations from day one. Get started today at orion.com/BFI20.
Hello and welcome to the Standard Deviations podcast. I am your host, Dr. Daniel Crosby, and today I'm joined by Amy Mullen, President of Money Quotient, a research and education organization that teaches advisors how to facilitate a unique, values-focused approach to financial planning. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So, Amy, this is long overdue. I was reacquainted with your work as part of the SHIFT conference, which looks like it was a massive success. And I wanted to have you on to share your wisdom with my listeners. But we're going to start at the very beginning. We're going to do what Simon Sinek tells us to do, which is start with why and talk a little bit about why you do the work that you do and how you got into this sort of work.
Great. Awesome. Actually, it starts with my mother's story. The story of Money Quotient really begins with my mother. And actually, when I was about 5 years old and my brother was about 10, my father left our family. And my mom was a preschool teacher at the time and realized that she had a lot of things that she needed to learn very quickly in order to take care of her small family on her own. And one of the big gaps in her knowledge, as you can probably imagine, was personal finance. And so there were kind of three really major insights that my mother had that actually launched the work that we do at Money Quotient. And the first was that she was not alone in not having the financial education needed to really understand and be able to make good financial decisions for herself. But the other insight was that it was not the people that she suspected who didn't have the financial education. So it was not just maybe the preschool teachers or blue-collar workers that she may have suspected, but actually the doctors and lawyers also really didn't know what was going on in their financial lives and didn't have the education. So that was a pretty big realization there. And then the third big insight that she came across when she really started to get into what are the financial literacy programs out there that can kind of fix the problem that we have, she found this research that indicated, and this is still shockingly true today, that even those who seek out financial education, because we know that it's typically not required in our schools, even when they seek out that education themselves, there is little to no statistical correlation with them actually adopting the financial strategies that they've been taught or changing their financial behaviors in any way. So what that means is financial literacy programs have largely been unsuccessful in actually getting changing of behaviors. So this was a huge inspiration, I suppose, to the life work that she then pursued. So she ended up going back to school and getting a master's degree. And part of her thesis project was studying, what were the factors that indicated what motivated adults to take action in their retirement life, in their financial life. And there was a lot of interesting findings, as you can imagine, that came out of that because it didn't have to do with some of the typical demographics that you might think in terms of how much somebody is educated or how much income they have or whether they're male or female or any of these kind of typical demographics. But it actually came down to the degree in which they thought about their financial. The more a person thought about their financial lives or had some sort of emotion attached to their thinking about their financial lives, whether it's a a fear or an aspiration, kind of emotions would affect the degree to which they would take action. So it's those who are more neutral, I suppose, in looking at their financial lives that haven't taken the steps forward. So I went into a whole lot of detail around that. But she then started her own research and writing organization after she got her master's degree, where she worked with various nonprofit organizations to develop more research, surveys and projects, but also developing various workbooks and educational materials that kind of tied pieces together from what she learned is effective in motivating behavior change. It was throughout that 10-year period when she was doing research and writing that she came up with the concept of Money Quotient, and then founded the organization in 2001. So she began to realize, like, financial professionals, whether you are a financial planner or you are a counselor or consultant, that you are uniquely positioned to be talking about both finances and personal life, uniquely positioned than any other type of profession. So they are people who could have a real impact in the end behaviors of that client. And so felt that these materials that she had begun to create and some education given to these financial professionals would actually have this ripple effect, right? If they are the people talking about these things with their clients, they can have a ripple effect in terms of positive financial behavior change in our society. So Money Quotient was founded in 2001. I'm her daughter, clearly, I said that. And she asked me to come and help her start the business. In the beginning, it was supposed to be temporary. I honestly, frankly, didn't understand even what she was doing, what she was putting together. And I was supposed to help with maybe designing some of the website and creative things, because my original background is in photography, in the art world. But I very quickly fell in love with the work myself and saw the positive impact that it had on people's lives. I was probably in my early 20s at that time, and was also profoundly shook up by the fact that, wow, I'm realizing now that me and my peers have also not been educated in this way, and how we've not been set up to succeed in our lives. So I became kind of passionate about it myself and went back to school, designed my own degree program, and put all the pieces together that kind of make the foundation of our work. So there's a lot of psychology, there's effective communication, there's adult development as well. And then I went through the CFP coursework and sat for the CFP exam as well. And now, 22 years later, Carol and I are still working together. Carol Anderson is the name of my mother, by the way. And we actually have two organizations now. We originally have been a 501c3 nonprofit organization for 19 years. And that was to focus on research and education. But as our organization grew and we realized financial professionals needed a lot more support and consulting in terms of integrating this sort of work and conversations into their client meeting process, we really built out these consulting programs. And then we separated into two organizations where our for-profit offers a very specific model that is based on research that advisors can follow. And then our nonprofit still continues to focus on research and kind of education in a broader sense as well.
Yeah. So one of the things I want to put sort of a fine point on both of your main themes there. The first is that, the people who need this help don't always look like you might think, right? I spoke to, I try not to get identifying information here. I spoke to a friend of mine who has multiple advanced degrees the other day, like more than anyone I know, extremely well educated and extremely wealthy. Eight figures wealthy in her early 40s, extremely successful by any measure. And she was talking to me about her financial life and asking for some advice. And she did not have one penny of her millions invested, not one penny.
Wow.
And the SVB bank run was what brought her sort of to my doorstep, but she was saying, look, I have millions of dollars in cash, and I've always thought that was sort of the safest place for it, but maybe not. And it was shocking to me that someone with multiple advanced college degrees and that much money was not a little bit better invested. And so that was sort of a reminder to me that of the truth that your mom discovered. And the second thing, I'm writing a book right now, very slowly, very painfully, and I'm doing research on financial literacy and finding out just what a gigantic disconnect there is between having been through a literacy program and then its ultimate efficacy or lack of efficacy, as I'm finding in most studies. So both points are well taken. One of the things that I like about Money Quotient is, as I was going sort of through the process of preparing for this interview, is that you've really sort of operationalized this process of true wealth planning. And you have a 5-stage process that aligns with the CFP's 7-step process in order to provide effective methods for advisors to meet the objectives of each stage, while also leaving enough flexibility and room for sort of more qualitative or subjective data gathering. So I want to talk about each of these 5 stages. If you could just give us like a couple minute hitter on each of these. Your first stage is the explore stage that aligns with CFP step number 1 to establish and define a client-planner relationship. What do you teach advisors in this stage that looks a little different than folks might expect?
Mm-hmm. Oh man, there's so much I could say about this. So first of all, I think it's important that advisors are aware of some of the psychological obstacles that might be psychological walls that might be up for clients as they come in the door. And recognize too that some of the traditional models that are in the industry that have been followed for many years at this stage of the process is actually making those mental obstacles to fully engaging in the conversation even worse. So they could potentially be causing more problems in terms of engaging those clients than opening the doors and helping the client to feel comfortable. So, for example, I think it's very common for a lot of financial planning firms to ask for a lot of quantitative information at the beginning with a prospect before they've even sat down for the getting acquainted meeting. And a lot of people are already feeling embarrassed or shameful around their financial situation. They may be shameful about the lack of financial knowledge. Since we all know that it's not required in schools, we can make the assumption that a lot of people have not had actual financial education in the formal form. And so there's embarrassment and shame. And if we are requesting a lot of financial information, there's likely going to be stuff in there that maybe they don't understand what you're asking for specifically. Also, a lot of people do find financial information to be very private and personal. And for them to be asked to share a bunch of that before they've even met you and built any trust with you is creating a barrier to that prospect even wanting to come in and talk with that advisor up front. And also, it's subconsciously communicating that it's more about your numbers than it is about you and your personal goals. Just by simply asking for all of that information up front, you're subconsciously communicating that you care more about what's going on in their financial life than you do about their personal life. So you're actually, with this sort of process, creating more barriers rather than breaking those barriers down. So in our process, the explore stage, we talk about the importance of collecting a different type of information, more qualitative information. So rather than asking them to supply all their statements and financial data, we have particular questionnaires that help the advisor collect information about how satisfied the client is with different areas of their financial life. So this gives context behind their financial life. Are they feeling anxious or concerned about certain areas of their life? Are they feeling content and fine in other areas? As you well know, however, Daniel Crosby, that how somebody feels about their life isn't necessarily an accurate depiction of their actual life. So somebody could have a very lucrative career. They could have a lot of financial income, but feel very anxious and nervous about their financial situation. Or you could have the absolute opposite situation where they're buried in debt, there's overspending, and they are oddly feeling very content and fine with their financial situation. So by understanding a bit more about their levels of satisfaction with various aspects of their financial life, it gives the advisor a much better and broader understanding of what the scope of engagement is going to be and how much support and help that client might need moving forward in adopting healthier financial behaviors. We also have them focus on life transitions rather than the financial information as well. So if they have career changes in their future, or maybe they have children who are going to get married, or they have various life events that are on the horizon, the focus of the conversations are what's happening in your life and what are the financial implications of the life event, rather than a focus on here are the financial services we provide: insurance, tax planning, investment management, and trying to convince the client that they need all of them. Rather, they talk about the life events that the client is experiencing and all the financial implications that are attached to that life event. This is going to bring about a lot more motivation for that, a lot higher levels of motivation to move forward with that advisor if the focus is around a life event that they have an emotional attachment to, versus trying to convince them that they need investment management or they need retirement planning. So there's a lot of topic areas, I think, that move the conversation more towards qualitative sort of discussions versus quantitative discussions right even at the prospect stage of the process.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful because, it's a tactical enough decision to ask for all these financial statements, and there's a utilitarian need that it serves. But in that process, we really are conveying to that client what we care about. Mm-hmm. I won't name names, but when you see all of these find an advisor sites, there's a handful of sites now that try and match you with an advisor and then take a cut, right? Take a trail. It's always the first question is always, how much money do you have?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's never about you or your needs or what matters to you or what you've been through. It's always like, hey, do you have enough money for this advisor to want to give a darn about what's going on in your life? Right. And we really are conveying that to them in a big way.
I can understand why, and have gotten pushback in this arena in the past of not collecting financial information up front, because how are you sure if they're going to meet your minimums? But there is ways of collecting that information where you're not leading with it. You're not leading with how much do you make, but actually you're leading with understanding who this individual is, what they're concerned about, what they aspire to, and what life events are coming in the future, and then asking kind of the follow-up questions of their actual financial situation. So you're creating an environment that subconsciously communicates to the client that you care about them as a whole person first, and then you're kind of backing that up with a few questions that focus on the quantitative part of what you need to understand about that client.
Yeah. So your true wealth planning process actually has two stages of discovery. The first of which is engage, where you focus on identifying core values and arriving at clarity around the client's perspective and frame of reference. That all makes complete sense to me, but the psychologist in me is screaming, look, people don't have great insights into their own behavior and values and impulses generally. And I would say that they have an added level of disconnect when it comes to their financial behaviors. So how can we facilitate a good discovery process, help clients dig deep, but not put our own fingerprints all over this in the process?
Right. This is so true. I think one of the biggest misconceptions in the financial planning world itself as a whole is that clients already know what their values are and they already know what their goals are, and they simply just need to tell you, and then you'll figure out the financial situation. So you'll see a lot of financial planning firms that will have their initial questionnaires that will just simply ask, what's important to you? What are your values? And what are your goals? And they feel as though they've done the work. This is them doing their qualitative data gathering. But the truth of the matter is, like you said, people have a real difficult time articulating their own core values. Or I think what's even worse is that they don't realize that the values that they think that they have are actually riddled with external influences. So they are influenced by everything around them, the media, marketing, what's happening in society, the way that they've been taught growing up as children. I mean, there's so many things that influence your perspective and influence your values, but we get so hung up on what we think that we want today. Even the clients who come into you and say, you know what, I know what my values are, I know what my goals are, we still feel like it's valuable to take a step back and examine these things to see if it has external influences attached to that value, because you can easily get headed down a particular path to what you think you want. Then you get there and you realize you're not happy, it's unfulfilling, and now we need to blow up the whole plan to rearrange it to head in a different direction. So it's well worth the time for advisors and clients to really examine this. So I'll share our perspective on how we uncover values. First of all, there's a lot of values clarification type processes out there or exercises that you can utilize. And I think if an advisor adds any of them to their process, it will add a lot of value to their conversations and to the clients themselves in helping to figure out what's important to their financial plan. However, there are some values clarification processes that I think are more effective than others. So you have seen ones where maybe there's a deck of cards, or you have seen like a list of 50 words where you whittle those 50 words down to your top 15, and then you whittle that down to your top 5. Usually these types of exercises are limiting in a couple of ways. One, in the types of value that they are offering as options. And a lot of times they have to do with principles like integrity and generosity and things like that. But values can be far broader than that. They can highly value certain relationships they have, or they can highly value even like locations that they enjoy going to with family, or objects that mean something really important to them. So those types of exercises can really limit their perspective of what a value is. and therefore maybe not necessarily get you to the full list of core values that you have. But also the other problem that some of them can have is that they can easily allow those external influences to creep in. So if you, as the financial planner, are the one who's facilitating this exercise, they may be influenced by your presence. They may want to impress you, right? And so they'll circle things that they think are going to be important to you because you're a financial planner. Or they're sitting next to their partner or spouse, and they know if I don't circle this particular value, I'm going to get a big elbow in my rib from my spouse who will be upset about it. So it's possible that you're not necessarily getting down to the core value that brings about motivation and inspiration for that person. So the method that we use in order to identify values is a couple of different things. One, we explore their history, their growing up years, that we learn about their career path, various things from their past that have helped to form the values that they are today. So their core values kind of naturally begin to be recognized as themes in their stories and in their answers. But then we also ask questions about things that bring about intrinsic reward. So what brings you joy? What makes time fly? What brings you that intrinsic reward and makes life feel meaningful and fulfilling? So the exercises that we have talk about, if time wasn't an obstacle for you, or if money wasn't an obstacle, there's just lots of different angles in which you can ask questions that will naturally bring about core values without supplying them with a bunch of core values and having them try to whittle that down. So it brings about kind of more organically things that are actually going to motivate them to move forward. And our engage stage is all about defining their point A. So who are they today? What is their perspective, their frame of reference? What is important to them? What's fulfilling to them? That's the first discovery stage of our process, engage stage.
Yeah, you bring up some great points. Social desirability is always a thorn in an assessor's side, right? People answering in ways that they want to be perceived and not ways that they actually want to be perceived. But when it comes to our financial goals and money and consumption in general, I mean, there is an entire world that is trying to tell us what we want, right? I mean, that's all that marketing is. And we just move through a world in which there's so many messages about what we should want, how we should think about money, how we should consume, and trying to disentangle all those messages to get to people's true values is quite a process. With the second part of your discovery stage is called envision. This is where you're helping that client cast a compelling future vision. The psychological terms here are salience and vividness, right? Like the more salient, the more sort of real this future feels to them, the better their behavior is going to be. How practically do you go about making that real?
Mm-hmm. Right, because the more visceral the vision, the more strong the quality of motivation is to move forward, move towards that vision, and the more likely they will be to actually adopt the financial strategies to help them get there. So you really want, this is such a critical part of the process to get high levels of motivation to follow through, that it's well worth taking the time to focus on this. So the way that we go about it is, you may understand this, but as adults, we don't necessarily, unless you're in the creative arts world, we don't necessarily exercise our creative minds as frequently as we did when we were children. So a lot of adults really have a difficult time visualizing. This is a thing that muscle is atrophied. So they have a difficult time doing this, and therefore we need to provide them with a framework or a practical process to guide them in doing this. And the way that we go about it is first to break down a grand vision into smaller, important sections of their life. So we use the Wheel of Life exercise. This is a pretty common coaching tool, although we did quite a bit of research around how exactly we want to label the different areas so that all people feel connected to each of the labels and that it does cover all the areas of well-being as well. So by breaking down the grand vision first into sections like family and community and health and leisure, these are just some of the examples, then we can help them to focus just on the individual sections alone, and then eventually pulling all of those sections together to create the grand vision. So we first look at what is right now in this moment in time, what is your level of satisfaction with this section of your life? And that usually comes from a gut feeling, right? This is really digging into their emotional brain, which oftentimes doesn't have a lot of context behind it until we spend some time thinking about and putting context to it. So that level of satisfaction comes from a gut feeling. And then we begin to talk about, well, what would help to raise your level of satisfaction in these areas? And as we are having these discussions, the core values from each of those individual areas become more clear. We start to talk about what is most important to you in these areas, what brings you happiness in these areas, and let's begin to envision what would an ideal life in just this one section look like. So when we help them to create that vivid vision, we actually ask them to describe it as if they are already living that life. So this is not a list of shoulds. So for example, like if we were to leave an adult to just tell us about what they should be doing in their health life, if they to create a vision of their health life, a common way that they would go about it is to literally list a bunch of shoulds. So in their health life, I should be working out at least 4 times a week. I should stop eating sugar. I should do this. I should do that, which clearly is not very motivating. It doesn't inspire me to move forward. But if we change that perspective and rather have them describe their ideal life as if it were already happening, what it felt like, what they were able to do, then it becomes a far more inspiring and motivating image. So as an alternative, they might say, I feel strong and healthy. And when my friends ask me to go on a hike on the weekend, I enthusiastically say yes, because I'm not worried about my endurance and being able to keep up with them. And I'm able to play soccer with my grandchildren in the front yard and not get winded. And, so if they're able to describe it, it becomes a much more vivid vision. And, a common question I think that advisors would ask about that is, wouldn't they be coming up with all kinds of goals that actually didn't matter to the financial plan? And I would argue, first of all, improvements in any area of their life more often than not come with some sort of financial tether. And if it's not that improvement alone that has a financial tether, then it's possibly how they're going to make room for it in their life has a financial tether itself. So it might mean, changing their work schedule to make room for more quality time with their family or something like that. But also, we need to remember, too, that our clients have no idea or perspective typically on what has financial implications and what does not have financial implications. So what we're asking of our clients is to give us a grand vision of what their ideal life would look like. And then our responsibility as a financial planner is to pick out all the financial implications from that vision to put into place or to talk to them about in order to help them reach that vision. So we can't expect the client to only share with me the things that have financial implications, because they wouldn't know whether it did or it didn't. And all of that additional information just helps you to create more of a strong relationship. So in the end, you can go back and always say, hey, remember that goal you had about spending more time with your grandson, putting puzzles together? How is that going for you? Have you been able to fit that into your life? So it just can help, any additional information about them that may not have a financial tether can still be valuable in terms of strengthening your relationship and making sure that client knows how much you care about their well-being.
Yeah, one of the things that's always fascinating to me about sort of the psychology of money and this work that we do is how sort of a simple twist on a question can lead to such dramatically different place. The simple act of framing it as, sort of imagine yourself as though you're living this life today moves you from this shameful, yes, I know I should be doing this, but I'm not thing, to this empowering place and this vivid place that gets them excited about the future. It's so compelling, it's so simple, but it's so powerful.
Right.
Yeah. So the fourth step is enlighten. And this is where you present the plan. And it seems to me that this is one place where it would be easy to kind of go into autopilot here and do, a very just okay job. What are some of the common mistakes that advisors make when presenting the plan, and what could we do better as an industry?
Yes, this is another area that I think is very well worth some examination and some challenging of kind of traditional methods of plan delivery, because again, I think it can create disengagement from the client if not done well. So a good friend of ours, Marty Kurtz, who is a past FPA president and part of our Money Quotient community for many years, he used to say, advice kills conversation, which is so true, because what is actually happening when you flip the tables around and you start providing advice? You're basically saying, I've heard enough. I don't need you to tell me any more, or I don't need any more discussion. I know what you should do. And there's so many things about that switch in communication that can cause a client to disengage from that. First of all, we all know that adults want to maintain autonomy. They want to be the ones to make the decisions. And so advice giving can feel as though you're removing their ability to make the choice. So one of the things, a couple of things in terms of making the plan delivery meeting more effective is, first, it is critically important that an advisor summarizes what they have learned about the client in terms of quantitative information. And it's best if you start the meeting off that way, because you can say, here's what I've learned about your vision of your life. Here's what I've learned about your values. Here's what I've learned about the life transitions that are on the horizon, the concerns that you have. You're essentially mirroring back all of the qualitative information that you've learned about them. This is, in my opinion, a demonstration of your fiduciary duty. So you're showing them that you've really paid attention and that you have their best interests in mind. Also, you as the advisor have your own confirmation biases. You have your own filters that you're listening through. So it's really important that you make sure that you've heard them correctly and understand that you didn't put your own stamp on the information and filter it in ways that fit your criteria versus what they actually told you. So that mirroring back is very important for the client to feel as though they've been heard. And again, to subconsciously communicate to that client that you have now based all of your recommendations on that information. I think a lot of advisors just feel as that is a given. They just feel like that is obvious. You just shared all this stuff about yourself. And so it's a given that now the strategies I'm providing are based on that. but it's really not, it cannot necessarily be that clear. And to make that direct connection is going to be a powerful moment for that client to hear their own words come back to them. So a critical thing to vastly improve that plan delivery is starting with a summary of the qualitative information. And the second thing is to present an executive summary of your strategies, of your financial recommendations that cover all areas of their financial life, because we want, again, to subconsciously communicate that we can't just look at the financial areas in silos, that decisions we make in each area of our financial life will overlap and affect other areas. So this executive summary is really important, and to show options. So this would be like from, I'm sure you've read the book Nudge, where they talk about setting up decision architecture. And so when you're able to lay out various options that show clearly what the pros and cons are, what the consequences of each option are, and you allow the client to choose the direction they feel best fits, they are going to be far more committed to implementing that strategy when they feel as though they've chosen the path forward. So you can see how this is kind of like supporting the client in their decision making rather than giving them advice. You should do this. I think you should do this. But rather, here are various options. Here's all the information that you need to make a good decision, and I'm supporting you in that decision. They're keeping the autonomy and therefore will be far more committed to moving forward and adopting the strategies.
One of the things that I learned in my assessment creation classes in grad school was never ask a question that you don't give feedback on, right? Like if you ask about a concept in an assessment, you want to show where that information showed up in the report, right? And I think so often we ask for reams and reams of paper sort of in our discovery process, and then it's like, what was all that for, right? Like, why did I have to go to all this stuff? So I think that makes a ton of sense. Tie it back, show that they were listened to, show that they were heard, and that all the effort they put into what was a pretty exhaustive process has gone to give them some truly customized advice. So we've got 2 questions remaining, but only time for one. So I'm going to make an executive decision now. We're going to skip the 5th step. There's something in psychology called the Zeigarnik effect. Here's a new bias for everyone to learn about. Zeigarnik effect says that we have better memory for things that are incomplete. So Amy's rundown of the 5-part process is incomplete. You got to go to her website, you got to check it out, and you got to talk to her about what the empower stage is. So the last question that I do want to talk with you about is, I'm completely bought in with everything you're talking about today. This whole true wealth planning process, so well thought out. But this is a message that I'm hearing more and more in the industry, that life is about more than money. And I think most clients are on board with this, right? But for me, I get a little bit cynical about it, where we as an industry are saying, hey, there's more to life than money for you, Mr. and Mrs. Client. But when it comes to me getting paid, I'm still taking 1%. And the ways that we get compensated, the ways that we operate as an industry are still very much rooted in money and financial outcomes. And yet we're sharing this message that there's more to life than money. How can we present this in a way that doesn't feel cynical and that feels authentic? And how can we do what we're asking our clients to do?
Whew, this, again, you could go a million different directions with this. I do think that it's become a common marketing message, right? And I'm highly doubtful that a lot of the people that are using these marketing messages are actually doing the kind of depth of discovery that we've been talking about today that actually provides that real clarity and value to the client. And frankly, the client may not fully know that whether they're getting that sort of service or not. In fact, I think those firms that are advertising in that way and then in their initial questionnaires ask, what are your values, what are your goals, they may truthfully believe that they are doing the qualitative data gathering and they're doing the life planning. And the clients may not have other experiences to compare it to either. So they may not understand. The industry as a whole has kind of set those client expectations, right? And to your point too, the various fee structures that we see out there may subconsciously be communicating the opposite of what we really want to communicate to those clients as well. So it's well worth taking the time to think about, what I'm putting out there in terms of the language I'm using. So if I'm also talking about, we want to help you with your financial goals, we have these financial services we provide. This also is, I believe, communicating the wrong message, because who has financial goals? Really? They're all actually personal goals. All of them are personal goals, but you need money to reach that personal goal. So we need to, people need to think about the language that they're using. They need to think about how their fee structure is being perceived by clients. I'm not going to get on my soapbox about fee structures. I definitely have my opinions about which ones specifically. They all have pros and cons to them for sure. I definitely have my opinion about what fits best with a more qualitative or holistic approach to financial planning. But I think what advisors could do a better job of in terms of setting client expectations is being less vague on their websites. If you go to people's websites, any financial planning website, you're going to see here's my meeting process. We learn about you, and we have, this discovery process, and then we do the analysis, and then we do the plan delivery. But they are all written incredibly vaguely. If you put a lot more context and you actually paint a picture for the client as to what the experience is like and what the outcomes are of the process and how that all comes together to create those customized recommendations, they're going to see right from your website that there is a difference between your process and what they've experienced at some of these other firms. So I think advisors could do a lot better job at setting client expectations up front via their website. Maybe there's a 15-minute call that they have with the client prior to coming into a getting acquainted meeting. They could do a lot better job of just sharing what the outcomes are going to be and what they should be looking for in a well-done financial planning process.
Yeah, I think that's perhaps the homework, right? If you're listening to this and you're on board with this message that life is, that true wealth is a lot more than just money, and you're using that, the difference between that being principled and that being sort of a marketing gimmick is the way you go to market. And I think you have to be thoughtful about every single part of your process. Right? There's no right or wrong answer, I think, with respect to fee structure or approach. But if we're asking our clients to do more and think more expansively about these matters, I think it's incumbent upon us to turn that bright light of introspection back on ourselves and say, okay, what are we doing to make sure that our process is about more than money? This has been awesome, Amy. Thank you for running us through this. If people want to learn more about your work, more about Money Quotient, where can they find you?
They can go to our website, moneyquotient.com, and there's a link right from our website also to our nonprofit organization as well. And both our organizations offer different learning opportunities and things that people can get involved in.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Standard Deviations. If you can't wait till next week for more behavioral finance insights, visit www.orion.com. All opinions expressed by Dr. Daniel Crosby and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of or endorsement by Orion and its affiliates, subsidiaries, and employees. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for legal, tax, and investment decisions. The opinions are based upon information the participants consider reliable.